So this is essentially a new venture. We are trying out a series of public talks and exhibitions on the broad aspect of writing. And so to start it off, we have Pooja Saxena, who's an award-winning typeface designer, lettering artist, and typographer. Through her design and research practice, Matra Type, she focuses on design in and for index scripts, notably Devanagari, and studying typographic visual languages that emerge in India. She is a devoted collector of ephemera and writes a newsletter about type and design curiosities called I Spy with My Typographic Eye. For over a decade, she has chronicled letterforms on public signage in the country to build a one-of-a-kind online typographic archive. She is the author of the upcoming book, India Street Lettering, A Journey Through Typographic Craft and Culture, which is going to be published by Bluff Publications in December this year. And after the talk, we are going to have an exhibition walk around at the library's second floor, where we have put up an exhibition of photographs taken by Pooja. All right, so without further ado, we invite Pooja to give a talk on material language.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I have to say it's really kind of thrilling to be here because when I was like a teenager, there were three potential things I wanted to do in life. One was to become a designer, one was to become a mathematician, and the third was to become a lawyer. So I don't know, if I'd taken a different path, possibly worked hard, been slightly successful, I might have been at a place like this doing something entirely different. So I don't know, it's just really thrilling to be in a place that's about maths. Like Sitapra said, for about a decade, I've been documenting letter forms and public signage in India. And that's kind of lived as an online archive called India Street Lettering. And what I'm going to talk about today is a lot of observations and questions that have come up through the process of this documentation, but also through the process of the various ways in which I've tried to organize and reorganize the letter forms that I've documented. Right. So you already know my name and what I do, and largely what that entails is designing typefaces. But I also do a bit of design research, which has taken many forms over the years. Most recently, I was involved in a several years long project which was looking at studying how primary school students in about 45 countries learn how to write in the Latin script. Just to kind of get an idea of what handwriting education looks like in the world, but also, how Latin, which is often seen as and is in some ways a largely Western script, actually kind of gets different faces in different parts of the world, including India. But what I'm going to talk about today is largely this idea of seeing public lettering as an important part of our material culture. Even as someone who studied design, one of the things that one noticed was that signage and public lettering tends to fall in this kind of middle situation where it is not quite architecture and not quite design either. It's kind of at an intersection, so it falls into a black hole. Nobody really studies how to make it. Nobody studies what to see in it. So it's interesting, it's beautiful. When there is public lettering, it should ideally involve professionals from a few different specializations to work together, but that sadly rarely happens. And my own interest in it came from a place of feeling a scarcity or a lack. I started working as a type designer about a decade and a half ago. And one of the saddest kind of things was that while I worked in Indic scripts and I lived in India, the most resources that I had encountered about what letter forms in these scripts should look like was actually when I was in England doing my graduate studies. Libraries are notoriously hard to access in India unless you're going through, the perfectly right path. If you're not already a scholar at a university, it can be even harder. For some reason we think that the layperson doesn't deserve, books or archives or whatever. So I just felt that there was so little to look at in terms of reference material, right? And one of the things that I decided to do then was be like, what can I learn from what I do have access to? Because that's the only thing that I can control. So public lettering became one of those things of like, if as a type designer, those are the only resources I have, what can I learn from that, right? And it was also important because as a designer, at least I feel that any successful work requires an understanding of whatever the cultural or design continuum of that community or region is. That doesn't mean that everything that is successful is a continuation of that continuum. It could also be a subversion. But even to do the latter, you do need to understand what you're subverting and why. And so public lettering then especially became a really interesting thing to look at because it also falls a little bit apart from the pedantry of a lot of top-down design or top-down art, because it is often made by people who may not have a professional education in either arts or languages, right? But they do make this work that all of us understand and appreciate. So the first thing that I obviously had to start doing was documenting things, right? Just looking at stuff on the street wasn't enough because, I mean, you look at something, you think it's beautiful, maybe you notice an idiosyncrasy, but to really study them, it requires more. So that meant photography, which, if I'm being entirely honest, when I was studying design, I absolutely hated and didn't want anything to do with. I regret it sorely now because it would have been useful to learn something when I was being taught it. But I was a brat, I didn't want to learn. And so the first step, of course, photography, and like, I have to upgrade like my Dropbox account every couple of years because the number of photographs I click just keeps increasing. In fact, like part of the reason why I'm in Chennai right now is to document street lettering in Chennai. So in case any of you has recommendations about where I should go, I'd be very happy to get them. But beyond documentation, it became an exercise of trying to work out how I could make meaning from the hundreds and thousands of photographs that I was clicking, because it can be really easy, especially these days, to just click a picture. Somehow we think of clicking a picture and or posting it somewhere as like a complete action in itself which has value, which is like a kind of slightly tenuous belief to have. So now I've clicked these pictures, now I have them, but what do they mean and what can I do with them? So the kind of really obvious thing to do was to start building these different typologies of the letter forms that I was collecting. And this has over the years taken like lots of different shapes. So for instance, what is the sign for? What is the material that it uses? What are the scripts that it has? Do I know who made it? Do I know when it was made? So kind of finding all of these various ways in which signs can be categorized. And then also digging in a little bit deeper from a type designer's perspective, from looking at things like what are the styles that I see on this letter form. So many of our writing systems have undergone like reforms, especially after independence. So the forms that I see on these signs, are they pre or post reform? Do they actually reflect the reform? And they may not in a lot of cases. So those became a lot of the different ways in which I started looking at these signs. But of course, the thing is that documenting street lettering is a particularly like heartbreaking exercise because stuff disappears and gets broken down way more often than like one would like. So for instance, here in Chennai, there was a sign that I had photographed back in 2018 with a really poor camera that I wanted to re-photograph this year. It was a sign in Triplicane for like a local bookshop called Gohar Book Depot. And I showed up and, well, the sign doesn't exist anymore. So this, and it doesn't just happen at like small shops and such. So like this is a sign for an apartment complex in like the Chanakyapuri area of Delhi. So we're thinking like posh, the folks who live here can probably maintain this sign. But it stayed this way for almost 4 or 5 years, and only a few months ago has the sign been kind of fixed. So the Palika is back to being horizontal. And then like as signs deteriorate, you also see some really interesting ways of repair. So this again, sign from Chennai. So, and from what I understand, this is for a company, very fun name, I have to say, that deals with like spare parts for automobiles, and they've been around since the 1950s. Wood signs tend to be from like post-independence eras in most cities, so this is a fairly old sign. But what I find really interesting here is that as the wood broke off, there was clearly either no budget or didn't know who to go to get it fixed. So they just started painting stuff in white. So it kind of is a, you see how things happen. And also like clearly they were not a private limited when the company started. So the P has kind of appeared in paint as well. And so, I mean, one can argue that sort of like the sanctity of the sign is kind of gone, but it really does tell you what the life of, something in a city looks like and how it changes. In fact, if you look at all kinds of signs these days, I find that the one thing that's ruined all shop signs in the last few years is the regulation that everyone needs to display their GST number. So no matter how beautiful a sign, everyone has to like print their GST number on an A4 sheet and like stick it on their sign, right? So that kind of thing happens all the time. But also like, so these are some really beautiful signs from Lucknow, which I saw, and in 6 months they disappeared because it was an older part of the city and there was some manner of an urban beautification drive, which meant that they took this stuff down, which I mean to me makes no sense because this is beautiful. What they replaced it with was like these uniform black and white flex signs. And so it really makes you question what our understanding of like beauty is or how we like to view our urban spaces. We kind of replaced like very well-meaning, very well-produced craft with like just homogeneous design, which I suppose we thought was better because it was digital. That's the only like thing that makes sense. Then of course science can be quite interesting because of other kinds of regulations, like everyone's beloved like Hindi imposition everywhere. So this is from Bangalore, and I particularly love this sign because if you read Hindi, the Hindi sign is just a travesty, as it should be, right? Like if you kind of force a whole group of people who really don't care about this language and force it on them, and then also expect sign painters who don't speak, read, write the script at all to make signs in it, like what do you expect? There are spelling errors. Some stuff doesn't even look like a letter, don't know what it is. Like the only reason I can read it is because I know what this is, otherwise it would be impossible to do so. But also signs tend to change because fashions change. And that's not just like with the sort of incoming of digital design. So this is from a bookstore which originally had like, or still has actually, this really lovely wood sign. But as the years went on, they felt that a painted sign made sense as well, and they tried to kind of replicate the style in a different medium and did a okayish job, though the original is a much more accomplished piece of craft. And then of course, entire businesses which would boast of great signs disappear, right? So one of the businesses which traditionally had spectacular signs was single screen cinemas everywhere in the country, even if it was a small town, right? But with their disappearance, not only does some very beautiful architecture go away, but also like signs. So that one on the right is from Kolkata, and this was demolished last year in February. Like absolutely gorgeous, like building. I mean, if I could take that sign home, I would, but I don't know where I would put it. It probably wouldn't even go through my front door. And this is from the city here, and you can already see. I mean, I don't know how long this theatre has been closed. It used to have a Tamil sign which is gone, and you can see that things are in fairly poor state now. So once I have all of this documentation and I've managed to click these pictures of signs that haven't disappeared, one of the first things I try to do is to make formal connections between letters. And I found that it's often helpful also to make formal connections between styles of letters and the architecture that you find them in, because it's an interesting question, right? What kind of building should have what kind of letter form? So these are images from Oval Maidan and Kolaba in Mumbai. If you're familiar with Oval Maidan, it is a neighborhood which came up in the 1930s with the Back Bay reclamation in Mumbai. So this was all water, and then there were these really posh apartments that were built. And this is like a row of Art Deco apartments. And most of this is, I think, Brightlands and Greenfields are from Colaba. The other 6 that you see are from Oval Maidan. And you see that in this particular case, Art Deco buildings were kind of matched with Art Deco lettering. Is that the only way it goes? Not really. This is an Art Deco, like, little hospital clinic thing in Lucknow, like absolutely spectacular deco windows that you can see here, but the lettering is actually like fairly traditional, inspired from print, and has very little to do with, you know, the architectural style of the building. But going back to these, one of the things also is that, for instance, a style like Art Deco, it exists in architecture. It does exist in typography, but barely so. This is where it draws from. So it's also an interesting opportunity to see how Art Deco is kind of imagined in letter forms. So you see some kind of like tropes that repeat themselves. One of those is, for instance, these letters which are like solid, right? All the holes inside them, which are called counters, have kind of disappeared. You see that in a few different examples. You see that these letters are what type folk call sans serif, which means like letters with feet serif, letters without feet sans serif. So most of them are sans serif. They tend to have, you know, sometimes a mix of uppercase and lowercase letters. They tend to have like these very languid shapes like this S, which in fact has been called the Siesta S, which I think is a really, really nice name for it. But also you see it being juxtaposed with like Art Deco motifs like the sunburst. And you know, it has other features, like for instance, the vertical proportions can be really interesting. So like, you know, how there are low-waisted pants versus like high-waisted, the kind that I'm wearing now. So a lot of the letters have low waists. You see just a lot of play with geometric shapes as well. And again, like Chennai has so much Art Deco, like just everywhere. And so this is the Oriental Assurance Company building in near Paris Corner. And you see, again, deco building, but you see some lovely deco touches in the lettering as well. You know, a low waist in the R. You see this E with a high waist, and for some reason an extending kind of middle bar. So just, I mean, a lot of the Art Deco stuff that one sees is just stylish, you know, even if one doesn't understand the jargon behind it. So sans serif is a categorization. There are probably thousands of fonts which fall in that category. I would imagine that most of the lettering that we are seeing is not a font. This is someone who drew the letters from scratch to fit on a particular building. A lot of printed signs that you'll see these days, those will be using fonts. A lot of the pre-digital stuff is not fonts. This like a fairly like dramatic example from a defunct cinema in Lucknow called Odeon, pretty much on the cusp of being demolished anytime. I feel like one of these days I'll go to the city and this thing will be a pile of rubble. Again, this is a really, really nice example of Art Deco lettering, and this is again from the city. I mean, look at that ampersand, right? Like, this is like, whoever designed it was just, I mean, they had such spectacular taste, but not just that, like, they also had like immense skill to be able to pull this off in wood, right? And if you see like the style in which Pen Specialists is written, and we kind of, you know, if I go back, you know, like so similar to what we're seeing in something like Queen's Court or Palm Court. So some of these styles is kind of, but yeah, I mean, this might now be one of my like top 5 favorite signs from the country. But also one sees that the same kind of ideas that we were discussing about what might make a sign Art Deco in English or in the Latin script can often also translate to scripts from the region. So here we've got two signs in Devanagari, one from Haridwar, one from Mumbai, both kind of taking different routes to be Art Deco. So this one you see very narrow, is doing something interesting with like where the midline of the letters is by moving it up and down, whereas that one much more like the Gem and Company sign with these, you know, filled in shapes. Also extends to other scripts. This is Town Hall in Ahmedabad, which is again made by Claude Batley, really famous building, lovely Art Deco sign, and that's an old cinema from Kolkata called Ellora, which again more in the Gem and Co kind of style. But also, so that is, I guess, one kind of formal connection, right? Which is trying to see how a particular style, how a particular fashion of a time is kind of translated into letter forms, especially as they're on buildings. But as a type designer, what is also interesting to me is to see how the same form, the form of a letter, is imagined and reinvented by sign makers. And I find that particularly interesting because a lot of what one ends up studying in formal education is based either on calligraphy or based on printing technology, which often tend to be fairly elite exercises, right? But those are not the only ways to draw a letter. And this is from Haridwar, extremely religious city, made me very uncomfortable. But what was great about it from my perspective was that I could find hundreds of signs which used the, you know, the word Shri, because they were like Shri and then there was some god's name afterwards, right? And then you see it kind of, in all of these 8 examples, the same letter has been drawn in like 8 different ways, but they're all completely recognizable if you read the script, right? And to go back to what I was saying about, you know, like pedantry versus seeing what design or letter forms might look like from the bottom up, this is a great example because like folks here are not thinking how it looked like in calligraphy necessarily. Maybe in this one, this is the closest to calligraphy. But we see that there are ways to make letter forms which don't have to necessarily come from calligraphy. They can come based on what tools we're using, what material we're using, and it lets us kind of, it lets me as a type designer try to work out what the essence of a letter form is. And as long as that is visible, most people will be able to read what it is. It doesn't have to be perfect. The essence has to be captured. And again, a third kind of formal connection is often just comes from our own like biases, right? These are 2 mosques, maybe a kilometer away from each other. The first one uses calligrams, which are a fairly traditional, you know, cultural artifact. But what is really interesting to me is the second mosque, which puts its name in English and then decides to put the motif of a minaret on every letter wherever it was possible, right? So, which is kind of like, it's a little bit cheeky almost. And that is not necessarily a sentiment one associates with any kind of religious organization, any kind of like faith, right? But through letter forms, you actually see that things are not as like black and white almost as they seem. And then folks can be, there can be quite a bit of levity and almost humor as well in how folks kind of represent their own identities. Right. So the next thing that I kind of do apart from formal relationships, and they're quite connected, is to look at material constraints, right? Are there different, I mean, how do I look at the physicality of the letter forms in public signage? Because in some ways, unlike printed letters, these are often literally physical, right? They're 3-dimensional objects. But also like they use different materials, and those have constraints in how letter forms can even be made. Not to mention, different materials can have cultural identities because of their use, not just in real life, but also in popular culture. So since we were speaking of Art Deco, this is another rendition of what an Art Deco sign can look like. Doesn't have any of the formal qualities that we discussed, but it is a sign which is on an Art Deco building, but also uses a material called colorcrete, which is extremely common in deco architecture, which is basically like some kind of like hard setting cement, and then you put like I think it's oxides, some kind of oxides which are added to it, which gives them this like various pigments which then don't fade. Like I don't know if you've been to any of those buildings in Oval Maidan, they have like these beautiful colorcrete floors, colorcrete like balustrades, like it's a really common motif. And in some of the older parts of Delhi where there are Art Deco homes, a lot of them have these signs which are rendered in colorcrete. So this is Art Deco not because of any because of anything deco in the forms of the letters, but it's deco because of the material in which the letters have been rendered. I mean, one material that which I absolutely love is neon, and one sees a great deal of neon here in Chennai, especially because of the Government Scientific Glass Training Institute, which is for scientific instruments in glass, but neon signs are also blown glass tubes. I've been interviewing this gentleman who runs a shop in Coimbatore. So his father and him both came and studied at the institute and then went ahead to run their neon sign making business, for example. And neon is really interesting because, what is neon, right? It is neon signs. It's basically a long glass tube that has to be bent, and it has to be bent to make a letter form. What that means is that any rationale we have about how letters are made using gestures, right, whether through calligraphy or handwriting, all fall apart when it comes to neon, because there is basically two things that have to be ensured when somebody is making a neon sign. One, they don't burn themselves. So the glass tube can only be bent in a particular direction at any particular time. And two, the glass tube doesn't break, which means that there are overlaps in stroke directions in neon letters which just don't exist in handwriting or in calligraphy. So if you look at the T, which is like the third thing if you don't read Tamil, you see that there is like this overlap in how the glass tube moves. You would never write the letter like that. It would not make any sense. It's not efficient. But it's one of the only ways in which you could make a neon sign, because you have to kind of, repeat. Also, the neon signs, their ends have to be connected to like power, right? So you're trying to use one neon, like one glass tube as long as possible. So there's lots of overlaps to create the same shape. So like here, again, you can see in each of, like with the crown, for instance, it's one glass tube which makes the entire crown shape instead of having like different shapes. And so you see like really interesting letter constructions when it comes to neon, but neon also has these very strong like cultural meanings. So on the one hand, it's seen as something that is stylish, which is posh, especially like in the 60s, and so it would be seen as something, like, I don't know, I guess like high society almost. So these are all signs from MG Road in Bangalore, and it used to have like, it was just a gallery of neon signs maybe 15 years ago. Out of these signs, only Canopy survives. Everything else is gone. That one is actually still lit up in the evenings.
Kaveri exists.
Oh, no. You think it exists. Kaveri, the building exists. Kaveri, the Emporium. It's mostly broken and has been covered by something halfway. So there used to be like, I hope it's back. There used to be a Kannada Kaveri and a Latin Kaveri both. And I think the Kannada is definitely gone.
Yeah, but the English.
This one is surviving.
Yeah,
that's great. It doesn't light up anymore, and I think it's lost its glass tube.
Glass tube.
Yeah, it just has the metal.
Sign is still
kind of hanging
holding its shape there.
Yeah, I was really sad when these two went away as well, like Parade Cafe, which is like Koshi's.
Yeah.
At Anil Kumble Circle, and I do a guided type tour on MG Road, and so I went, and the Parade Cafe sign was there, and then we came back to do the tour a week later, and it was gone. And like, I think I was like inches away from actually crying in front of like 20 people because the sign was gone. This one was also really sad. I don't know, like I was looking up this store, I was a kid when like the Miss World pageant happened in Bangalore. Maybe some of you remember it. But this was the place which like supplied the saris to like the contestants or whatever. So this was supposed to be like this really like people thought this shop was really special, and now they have like some really boring like regular like logo or whatever, and they've gotten rid of this like rather special
In today's
sign.
context, do they think neon signs are cheap?
Sorry?
I said, in today's context, do you think people also think that neon signage is actually cheap?
Cheap in price, no.
No,
but
not cheap in price.
Uh,
Cheap in terms
but-
of, just as it was elite at one time.
that's what I
It's
was
probably-
coming to. So, like in Delhi, for instance, a lot of neon signs exist in a neighborhood called Paharganj, which is right next to the railway station. And all the neon signs are, I mean, this is an exception. This is a movie theater that was built in the 20s. The sign is almost like it's lost its glass tubes. But those working neon signs are all for really seedy hotels. Really, truly seedy hotels. So the meaning of a neon sign, I mean, you think of like movies like Blade Runner and things like that, right? So it gets connected with this kind of seedy, dystopian, negative connotation. So in a matter of like half a century, what it means completely changes. So you're absolutely right. So yeah, so like in Delhi, neon is kind of seedy. 15 years ago in Bangalore, it was still kind of posh. But there are other materials as well which kind of create these interesting constraints for scripts. So this is a style of house number and street signs in old government quarters in Delhi. This is a way of doing signage which was also fairly popular in parts of London and Glasgow. So these seem to be sort of like the last remnants of, you know, the British Raj. What is interesting about them is that if anyone here has ever used a typewriter, you'd be familiar with the idea of monospaced fonts, right? Where every single character or letter has to take the same amount of horizontal space, so the same width. And normally we associate that, I mean, with typewriters. But this is a really interesting, tangible example of letters that need to be monospaced, because the idea is that things are not going to overlap over tiles, right? In English, it becomes kind of straightforward, as you can see in block number 12, quarter number, whatever. It gets a little bit more complicated when they had to do Hindi later, because they couldn't figure out whether the half form should be its own tile. I mean, they decided with that, and now it's like, I don't know, twice the size of that. But also, like, how could they have possibly fit all of this in one narrow tile?
Are these colors in the tiles, as in the material of the tiles, or are they stickers?
They're not stickers. I think they're an overglaze. They're overglaze on tiles. And then these are largely being replaced by these blue flex signs, as you can see. But yeah, I mean, you still see them in like a few neighborhoods where there are government quarters in Delhi. So this is really interesting because like a printing technology constraint, or something that we think only of as a printing technology constraint, also exists in physical, tangible forms. To kind of continue speaking of tiles, these are Gujarati letter forms. From these, so if you go to some of the cities in Gujarat, like Ahmedabad, Baroda, you see these public benches, which are usually covered with tile, and they are built by folks as memorials, often for family members who've passed away, but sometimes they're also built as like, I don't know, tributes to like the MLA or something. Until maybe a decade ago, they would always be made using like old broken tiles. So like you can clearly see like this is China from somewhere, this is like some other tile, like nothing matched. But all the text would be laid out in these abstract forms. Now, of course, all of this has been replaced with like normal like bathroom tiles, which are printed, and they just put the text in the middle. So these have pretty much disappeared. I've been trying for like a couple of years now to find someone who still does this, and it seems like no one wants this, no one does this anymore. But here it's interesting because tiles can only be cut into pieces which are that large with only that much finesse. So you see this like really, like, at least to my eyes, beautiful abstraction of the Gujarati letter forms, right? Not so much because someone is trying to make a style statement, but because of the constraints of the material and technique that they're using.
But in terms of readability, this performs very poorly.
I don't know.
No, it's quite okay. If you read Gujarati, it's quite fine. I mean, I'm not a fluent Gujarati reader, but I can read what it says quite easily. also like there is a lot of like just in print culture as well. There is a lot of stylistic variation in Gujarati styles. It's one of those writing systems where there is a lot of investment in like how the script looks. So this doesn't fall too far, you know, from what people expect. This is again an interesting example. This is from a church, which basically had these 4 parapets in plaster, and the name of the church is basically presented in stencil letter form on a parapet. We normally think of stencils to like put more functional information on walls as graffiti, but this is an entirely different you know, use case. Also, like the letter forms are kind of Art Nouveau.
Is that embossed or
No, no, no.
engraved?
These are holes. This is a stencil.
No, what I mean is it a relief? Does it come out, or does it go in? Because there's a chiaroscuro happening here.
No. That's what I'm saying. This is hollow. You can put your hand through. This is a
Right,
stencil,
okay.
right? So it's not relief or emboss. It's basically like a stencil. I mean, normally we
That's
use a
right.
stencil to paint something, but this is a stencil as the final sign.
What may the depth be?
The thickness of the parapet.
Which would be 2 inches, 3 inches, 4 inches, 5?
About 3 or 4 inches. About 3 or 4 inches.
Cement or plaster of Paris?
I think it's plaster of Paris, just going by how small some of
It
the.
can be bricks.
It can't be bricks. I mean, this what you're seeing here is more than 100% scale. This parapet is actually smaller. Like it would have been about 70% of the height that you see here. So, like brick is just completely impossible at that scale. Plaster of Paris is what it
So the
appears to be.
black we see is also show through, right?
Exactly. It's, yeah, all of it. Yeah, there is. I mean, I think it was just dirty at the back. Yeah, and on top you can. And so there was like a little bell tower type of structure.
Portuguese church, huh?
Syrian church.
Syrian.
Fort Kochi.
Yeah, Fort Kochi.
Portuguese, they had.
What do you mean?
That's
I wish I knew. But yeah, I mean, I thought this was just beautiful, both in terms of like the, you know, the material and the technique they used to make it, but also like they didn't choose the simplest letter forms to make a stencil out of. They chose decorative letter forms to do it out of, right? So which also feels a lot at odds with how we do a lot of signage these days, which is very much about functionality and ease and very little about like beauty or delight, and they seem to be like the opposite of that. So they had 4 of these basically on 4 sides of the tower. Another one of my favorite kind of types of signs is like ribbon lettering made out of metal, which again fairly straightforward but has its own little you know, needs and quirks. So this, for instance, like if you want it to stand with nothing on the back, then it has to be uppercase. The moment you need it to be lowercase, because there is like descending forms and ascending forms, you kind of need to put it on like a board or something, which would be true of doing it in any of the Indic scripts as well, because they're not as straightforward as just putting on a baseline. Then of course there are extremely normal materials like wood, which certain like lettering artists or certain communities start to do like just unique, interesting things with. So this is a style of sign which basically involves these like multiple layers to build up like this 3-dimensional letter form, which is just really common across deco buildings in Lucknow. Haven't seen it anywhere else. There are little bits about the letters which make them deco, like for instance this like diagonal middle bar of the H, but otherwise this is just a unique way of constructing letters out of wood that exists in a particular place. Yeah, sometimes really fancy, painted gold, some are like super dilapidated now, but all of them quite lovely. And then of course, once you start seeing signs as material culture, you get to think of them as stories, as pieces of history. And I'm sorry, I will look at my piece of paper because I'm really bad at remembering facts, and this will help me a little bit. So I mean, there are different kinds of stories, right, about who made the sign, who commissioned the sign, why were those particular choices made for that sign, were there cultural reasons, were there personal reasons, and so on. So I love cemeteries, which is an odd thing to say, but I mean the reason I love them is because they always have like really beautiful letterforms. In fact, I went to the Armenian church here 2 days ago, and they said that some folks came there and made some, I don't know, dancing reels or whatever inside the church, and now they don't allow any photography. So I saw all of those beautiful gravestones and I couldn't photograph anything.
Those dots, there are stucco marks.
These kinds of letters are called leaded.
I'm talking about the dots.
Yeah. So this is basically, these are called leaded letters. These were attached
Stucco-
on it.
stucco marks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, stucco marks. Yeah. So this is from Delhi, from the Nicholson Cemetery, which was a cemetery set up after the 1857 mutiny, named after Nicholson, who was like a British hero. And a lot of the
It's very strange to see, like her age 32 years, 4 days, everything. We don't see any.
we don't see that anymore.
Yeah.
That's true. And actually, I mean, I don't think I have that picture in the presentation. There is this really beautiful gravestone there of someone who died of a heat stroke in 1907, and it sent me down this kind of like wild goose chase about like was it actually warm in August in 1907? As it turned out, it was a really hot year, and it kind of like led me down a path that like I wouldn't have if I wasn't paying attention to what was written on it. But a lot of the gravestones that I found there were, you know, like you see this little bit, which is the name of the company that actually created the gravestone. So the name that you see there is Sweries and Company, and you can see a little bit of Calcutta, and there was a P that's fallen off. And I was able to kind of look into them, and it was set up by this gentleman called Peter Sweries in 1815 in Calcutta, and that seems pretty clear. His son got involved in the business, then he died, his son died, his son's wife's brother-in-law took over the business, also took care of their children. But the interesting thing is that this business was in Calcutta. It kind of extended all the way to Allahabad, but from what I can tell, they did not have any offices in Delhi. So a bunch of people made the choice to go to these people to get gravestones made. If you are in Calcutta, a lot of plaques at Presidency College, etc., are also made by Peter Sweries and Company. So they were clearly like sought after craftsmen in stone, and so possibly from Allahabad, this stuff came to Delhi in, does it say which year this is? No, it doesn't, right?
It's fallen off.
1901 something, yeah. So this is about 100 years after the company had been set up, and it was still really sought after. The second sign is for GG Whaling in Bangalore, MG Road. GG Whaling is a bit of a photography institution, if that's something that you're into at all. The first GG Whaling store was set up in 1903. The Bangalore one came later, and this wood sign they actually commissioned from an artist in England in the early 1930s, and it was installed sometime around 1935, 1936. And as you can see, that sign doesn't exist anymore. It's been replaced by a flex sign which kind of copies its colors a little bit. But you see a lot of different things at play here. So the original sign was made in wood and was only in English. I mean, it was 1935. Then of course came regulations to have the Kannada, and they didn't have the craftspeople or the resources to get that made in wood. So that just became like a painted sign using the same colors. Over the years, the sign was kind of in poor shape, and you can see things had already started falling off. So this little period is now just painted, it's not wood anymore. And so it became a bit of a hazard because they were afraid it would fall, and so they took it down. And for a very long time, they just kept it in their storehouse at the back of the shop. So if you went there and caught them in a nice mood and really begged, they would let you in, and they would let you see this like beautiful sign just lying on the floor. And last I spoke to them, they said that if they can find someone to fix it at a budget that they can afford, they would love to fix it and put it back. But that's something that hasn't happened, and I don't know how long they will, continue holding on to this thing in their store. This is another interesting, just this cultural thing. So Lucknow has a lot of brass bands, which is like I mean, when I first heard about them, I was like, why? Why does Lucknow have brass bands? And it appears that in like 1920 or something, like some circus ship sank somewhere, and a bunch of those people showed up in Lucknow to, I don't know, make a living, and they started a brass band, and then it just became a thing that was really, really, popular. So the first one was called International Brass Band, and they would play like jazz and stuff, but often on the street, because they were playing it in like barats at weddings. So it was like this really interesting mishmash of like cultural things. And one of the best known bands there today is a band called Azad Band, which was founded in 1955 by a gentleman called Itwari Lal. And a lot of the brass band, so these are called their trolleys. A lot of the trolleys look like this. They're like very maximalist, very colorful. So Itwari Lal actually worked with a friend of his who was a sign painter to come up with a visual identity for his musical trolleys, which was restrained and minimalist to stand out. And I mean, Mr. Itwari Lal is I think passed on now. His son Ram Kumar Azad, he runs the band, and the sign painter's apprentice, who's now like, I mean, he's must be in his 40s or 50s, Muhammad Islam, he still paints it. So it's been like a family relationship, getting this very particular visual style for their trolleys. Right. The next thing I want to talk about is this idea of what are canonical forms of language, of written language. And signs often have a lot of examples which differ from those canonical forms. And I find it very fascinating to document those, because often we see things like script reform and language reform as a thing that is just objectively successful or unsuccessful, that once it's been applied, people just start using it. But the truth is often like quite different from that. So some of it is just forms which cannot exist in conventional like printing technologies. So in a script like Devanagari, for instance, in lettering of all stripes, you see a lot of interesting ideas like, this headline, which is normally supposed to be straight, for it to be curved, right? But neither in movable type, even today in digital typesetting, this is not something I can achieve. Right? It just can't be achieved. It can be drawn from scratch, but it can't be achieved. So, I mean, these are examples of what the script can look like, but tools that are present even today do not allow for that kind of configuration. Again, this is Bengali. You see like letter forms kind of filling in like an oval shape, right? Again, something that digital tools don't allow even today. I mean, you could do clip art, right? But clip art was only in English, one. And two, like clip art was mostly, how do I put it? It was not well designed often.
It's not that the tools don't allow it, it's that people doesn't really care enough to make a tool which allows it. It's not something we can't do.
No, I'm not saying we can't do it, but tools at present do not allow for it. Like as a type designer, I'm sure I could figure something out to make it happen. But so many of our like type design or typography tools are basically based on movable type for Latin script, which is so sweetly simple in comparison to a lot of the other scripts that are now typeset using that technology, right? So, for instance, if you do a curved baseline or like write on an arch sort of thing, you can do it, and you can do it in like Indian scripts as well. But for all the scripts which have headlines, the headline will break because there is no provision to make a smooth headline in case that happens. Or like the vowel marks which have to attach in certain places in all our scripts will just not be attached anymore, because who cares, like you said, right? So, I mean, what I find interesting about this is because we depend so much on these digital tools now and have on other tools for centuries, at least as designers, we are losing sight that our languages could also look like this. And unless we kind of preserve some of these examples, it's possible a few more decades down the line, people are like, oh, but this is like this innovative thing that's happening, except it's been happening for years and technology has kind of made it go away.
Also, it's very expensive. The cost of maintaining these signs become very expensive because there is not a lot of skilled makers who can do that. And in general with digital coming into space, the economics of it, like the budgeting and the finance, as you mentioned, the Gigi Welling, like it's not that they don't want to preserve it, they don't have the budget to actually do this. Because I know in Bengal a lot of these signs you can't maintain because it's extremely skill
Absolutely.
that people now if you don't train, because the younger generation kind of don't want to be
Exactly.
trained, and the second it's extremely expensive to kind of do these styles.
Absolutely.
So it's a cost effective measure. Economics also comes into the
Absolutely
sustainability
does.
portion.
I feel like a lot of it is a lot like fast fashion.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
it could also be an attitude, I think, at that point of time, even if the business was small, they were willing to give so much of thought, effort, and money into the signage, which is probably not there now, you know.
Yeah, it's
You're not
also-
dependent so much on the signage
Right,
as,
so-
as whatever, as your branding. I mean,
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So this is a sign from 1950. It says 1958 from Lucknow. I don't know if there are any Hindi readers in the room, and if everyone can actually read what this says. So the three letters that I've highlighted are what are now non-canonical forms of these. So Devanagari existed in two, broadly speaking, two forms. One which was being used in North India, one that was being used in like Maharashtra around Bombay. So the North Indian ones are called the Calcutta style letters, and this is what they are. And then they're Bombay style letters. And in 1953, when the script reform began, a lot of the Bombay style letter forms were adopted as the canonical form of the script, which means that these letters kind of went away. So this sign is actually possibly from, I mean, it can't be from before 1953. The house was built in 1958, even if the sign was put up later. But like the script reform had only that much impact on how people actually wrote letters. The funny thing is, so my parents grew up in a city called Kanpur, which is not very far from Lucknow, and I went to school in Delhi. So I was taught Hindi fairly late in my school years. So my parents were the ones who taught me how to write like Hindi numbers, for instance. They were both born in the early 60s. So by then, like, this reform is 10 years old, and they went to school as one does. The numerals that you see at the bottom are also the non-canonical versions, and that is what they taught me. It's only after I became a typeface designer did I learn that I had been taught the non-canonical form of the script, and that is what I had used for the first like 20 years of my life.
Did you get in trouble in school for writing?
And nobody cared if I could write in Hindi in school. That's the other thing, right? Nobody cared. And the thing is that, like, especially with numerals, in so many of our scripts, right? Like, right from what they decided in the constituent assemblies, we used the Hindu Arabic numerals with all our scripts, right? Instead of using local numerals, because that seems like something that everyone should be able to understand in a common way. So the numerals, like, I don't think I ever wrote them. And yeah, it took me like a good 20-25 years of being on this planet to realize that what I knew was non-canonical. And I pointed it out to my parents like after that, and they were like, what do you want from us? Like, what do you really want from us?
Reformation, was that a government effort?
Yeah, yeah.
And how?
Sorry, that is an R.
Very different from the usual.
See, that's what I'm saying. You were taught the canonical forms clearly. So if you look at this, if you can see, you see both versions, right?
Yeah.
This is the this is the one that they went with.
Okay.
So you can see like
Looks like
a lot of them. Like, in fact, when I was growing up, my grandmother, you have those books with religious songs, right? So my grandmother used to have them, and they all used to have the non-canonical form, and I could not, for the love of God, read them because I didn't recognize some of the letters. So like the I didn't know that is what it was. Another one that I found hard was the which
So-called
this one.
contemporary non-canonical.
Yeah, exactly. Like, this is what happened in like old books in my house, and that is what I've learned in school, and that caused a great deal of confusion in my life as a child.
The so-called non-canonical
Yeah.
remained canonical for 2,000 years. Right? Because if we go back to the oldest,
You see that form, yeah.
Is more like the pra.
Yeah, and like, for instance, hit the wrong button. So like this form of the 5, for instance, is also no longer the canonical form, but like my name is Pooja and kind of looks like the first letter of my name, so I always use it. And I'm like, other people be damned, that's the version I'm going to use, enough people will understand it.
How do you justify choosing Calcutta, Bombay version or Calcutta version?
I mean, because more printing was happening in Bombay, the Bombay forms just became the ones that were printed. As a result, they came to be seen as modern. They were modern simply because they had been printed. There was no other, I mean, neither of these forms is like intrinsically modern.
There was also more printed material.
Exactly in that. So then that became the one to go with. Right, and to come to the last section before all of you fall asleep, is the idea of just seeing them as things of craft, right, which you all were bringing up anyway. And so you also see, like, much like other artists or craftspeople, you see how sign painters actually define how a neighborhood looks. Like, they are often like the unsaid kind of arbiters of style in a neighborhood. So this is from Udaipur. And you see that there is such a consistent visual identity of what a food cart in Udaipur Sukhadia circle must look like.
How old is this?
These photographs, these were clicked in 2016, April of 2016.
2016.
9 years old. And you see some interesting things. I mean, obviously this is Udaipur, so you see a mix of Devanagari and Gujarati, because you're in that part of the country. You see, again, like this form of la is the Bombay form of the la versus, do I see the Hindi form of the la here? No, nowhere. You see like a lot of the shapes. Oh yeah, there you go, yeah. So you see the Hindi form and the Marathi form like basically next to each other, right? And then you see interesting things like, sorry? Oh yeah, same sign, two kinds of la. Good eye.
Gujarati is which is not there in India.
Yeah, and you see interesting things. So the Gujarati, like, traditionally often has like a little outstroke here at the end of the stem. Funnily enough, the Gujarati here doesn't.
Differently. It is it is not.
Here, right? It's not la here. Yeah. But in the Devanagari, they've put that little outstroke everywhere. So it kind of looks a little bit like Gujarati. So it's an interesting mix of things that they've done, which really encapsulates where this is geographically and culturally as well.
The origin of pakoda is not.
Yes, I would like to think it is the north. So yeah, but also like just very, like, you can see that there is a great deal of craft that's gone into making some of these bold letters. This is from Chennai. This, I will never quite understand why these people chose this name. Do not get it, like nothing they sell, I mean I'm sure some of it could be used to make a bomb, but that's a very interesting choice. Like this, I first photographed in 2018. I went back day before, this sign is still there. The shop is still called Bomb Brothers. Not sure why. These are both signs by a painter called Deena Arts. So you can see their name, and they have a very, very distinctive style as well. You see like this pulley is like a half circle rather than a full circle. Very interesting, like R's, which if you're kind of familiar with Cyrillic, they have a slightly Russian vibe, again not sure why, but you see like this very distinctive style that Deena Arts has, which they kind of, if you're near Paris Corner, it's everywhere. This is now near Triplicane, different sign painter, this time called Design Arts, who again have a very distinctive style. The Tamil is always on top, has like stripes, the English has this like 3D effect on it, and even like there is like this painted gradient for the subtitle, and things change a little bit. And so this is interesting. This is for rice pulses oil. This is cosmetics, toys, stationery, right? But like their kind of idea of what makes an attractive sign kind of stays, and you can you don't have to be a designer to tell that these are probably from the same like stable. And we all laughed when I said that two different things but same like style, but we don't seem to laugh when the same fonts, digital fonts, are used to sell us everything, right? For some reason, even in our heads, that is okay, that homogeneity is okay, but this is not. And at least to me now it feels like there are fashions, right? And for the community, for the area where this is in fashion, this will be used to sell everything. And in a different area,
It must be a very decent sign because they've used that Google logo to identify the location.
that's true. Very, very good eye. I mean, it could still be like about 10 years old, to be fair. Like the map, like, I wonder if they used it in, this one doesn't have it. This one doesn't have it. Also in worse shape. Right. And then, of course, there are like, so a lot of these styles of letterforms that we are seeing, at least in Western sign painting tradition, which is very well documented in books, in like manuals and such, all of these have very clear like terminology, right? So, for instance, the letterforms for best fancy corner, that is a style that's called prismatic. But for instance, in no Western manual or book, yeah, sure.
Then Y defines the direction of writing in the fancy Y.
Oh yeah, with the one being single, right? So, if you see, it's like normally when you'll draw Y, you'll do this and then draw this, right? But this is drawn the opposite way. This is the single stroke and that's the one that's been added. By looking at the light and shadow. So for instance, the way like this word is written, which reads Ganga, it basically looks like the sign was made out of styrofoam and then somebody threw marbles at it, right? Like that's the only way I know how to describe it. I have not been, I mean, I've spoken to several sign painters. I've gone through like dozens and dozens of sign painting books. I have not been able to find like a formal terminology to describe this style. Does it only exist in Haridwar? I haven't seen it anywhere else. Sorry?
The spelling error, that Sharbat is
Sharbat, yeah. So, I mean, those things happen. But also, like, I've been trying to make a bit of an effort to at least talk to sign painters who do speak like either Hindi or Punjabi or some Gujarati, which like languages that I understand, to learn if they have local names for these, for the Western terminology that I get to read in books, right? So, this is a gentleman whose name is Mohan Lal Sihani. He's been, I mean, lifelong sign painter in Chavdi Bazaar in Delhi. So, for instance, the letters that you see which say Supreme. So, if I were to describe this using Western terminology, these would be convex letters with the center line. He calls them noonshine, which is a really endearing mispronunciation of neon shine. So, that's his sign painted variation of, you know, neon signs. So, this kind of sign, this, which like I was saying, in American or British sign painting is prismatic. Sihani Saab calls it chonch wale, which basically is letters with beaks. Beaks, so I'm guessing like all the triangular ends is what has kind of compelled him to call it that. But when I brought up these names with folks in like Lucknow, they had no idea what I was talking about. So, and I asked, I mean, I constantly ask what they call them and they're just like, nothing. We just paint them. Like, why are you obsessed with finding out what they're called? We don't call them anything at all. So, it's also interesting that they are not interested in kind of assigning these formal names to these styles. And I also find it very like, it's a very uncomfortable thing to ask as well, because this is a craft that's passed on through apprenticeship. I am not their apprentice and I'm asking for this knowledge, but also as a woman, I am never going to be their apprentice. I mean, I have never seen a woman sign painter in my life in this country. The folks I've asked them if they've known one. No one has ever known one. So it's unlikely anyone is going to take me on as an apprentice. So I'm always like confused about how much.
Is there a collective of sign painters at all, or is it more like family and apprentice? That's all. That is another reason why they were not be naming it.
Yeah, a lot of it is apprenticeship only, and within like small communities. So in Lucknow, like I visited this neighborhood called Machli Mahal, which is like a neighborhood of craftspeople. Like I was told that if you want a car here, we have enough folks here to build one from scratch. Right, which I'm sure exaggeration, but like various kind of craftspeople work there, including a lot of sign painters. So even if it was not family, like you could be a wood person who would like to become a sign painter, so kind of ask your neighbor to become your mentor or something.
But do people still learn this?
Yes, they do. So this gentleman, Sihani Saab, he still has an apprentice who I met not like 3 months ago. So this was a gentleman who wanted to become a sign painter. learned from him for about 2 or 3 years, then got married, felt like economic pressure, gave up sign painting, went and took on a job, had kids. Kids are now in high school. He has quit his job and he's come back to be his apprentice. It was like a full Bollywood film, like the story. So, I mean, people still learn. But I mean, it changes quite drastically. Like this gentleman has like foreign clients. Like he's fairly well known. Like whereas the sign painters I met in Lucknow, they have like no work anymore. So it also just depends on where a sign painter is and what kinds of, I mean, how savvy they were with the changing world. So he actually, like, you can get any kind of sign done at his shop. So he paints the ones himself, but if you want a flex sign, he will charge a commission and send it to a printer. So he's kept his art alive, but he still makes money through commission on all other kinds of signs, like LED ones, whatever, everything.
Where is this guy based?
Chavdi Bazaar in Delhi. Yeah.
Cloth lettering came in the beginning, or the wood letter came in the beginning?
I don't know. No idea. And it might also change from place to place, like where people chose what.
Do they use a background grid against which they first write?
They do make horizontal guidelines, and often how that's done is that there is a long piece of yarn that's basically dipped in like red soil, and so they hold it on both ends and then they just pluck it. So there's a guideline made out of basically dust, so it can just be wiped off. In some cases, if they're doing really complicated letters, they might use like chalk that they can erase. I think you can see some chalk in this case, but yeah, a lot of times they'll just do even if they have to do chalk lines, so they'll measure, they'll make them with dust first and then draw lines wherever it's necessary. I think in terms of like, so if I were to go, so like this is unique, haven't seen it anywhere else. But you see these simple ideas like these shadows, right? Or even like lines in the middle, prismatic letters, like they happen not just everywhere in India, but across the world. I think what makes different neighborhoods or cities unique is how sign painters combine them, right? Like how do they combine them and how do they lay out their signboards as well? I think that's what gives like different places their kind of unique flavor. So yeah, to conclude, you can see this and many more photographs on the online archive, which is indiastreetlettering.com. If you go to any of the images, you basically get to see a lot of the classification that I spoke about at the beginning. And this is all tags, so you can, like, I don't know, click on fascia signage and see all fascia signage that I have, so on and so forth. There is hundreds of tags, and they're constantly changing and being added. And yeah.
There is a transition of pronunciation. Academy becomes academy.
Academy. Academy, yeah. Yeah, and I mean, this I find very interesting. Like transliteration also varies so much from state to state and city to city of English, and that's a whole other thing to study in like painted signs. Yeah, it was in Bombay. No, and also. And also, like some letters, like at least in Devanagari, right? Depending on whether it's Marathi or Hindi, the same letter is pronounced differently. So what is a jh in Hindi is a z in Marathi, right? So like for instance, if you see Pizza Hut signs in like Delhi and Bombay, the spelling of pizza is different, just because the letter is different. So you see a lot of like transliteration, like peculiarities. So yeah, you can check this out, and I'm desperately trying to finish writing this book, which is supposed to like go to the presses in October. So this book is being published by Blaft, which some of you might know. It's a local publishing company. We ran a Kickstarter campaign to fund it and got funded in less than 24 hours and pinched ourselves. We've got 5 days to go and we're about 340% funded, but you can still pre-order the book. It'll be on a discount. And we are making a zine, a photo zine, a little one of cemetery lettering to go with the book as well. So yeah.
That sign is from Thrissur, right? KJ Francis and Sons.
It's from?
Kerala, Thrissur.
No, that's from Port Kochi.
Oh, I've seen the exact same sign.
They probably have two
I
stores.
taken a picture of that.
Gee, I would love to see that. I would absolutely love to see that. I mean, this is the only sign from Chennai on the cover. This sign is gone. Went and checked. It's out. Now they have like some flex.
You didn't travel to Kerala and Andhra?
I did travel to Kerala. So you see Kochi. From Andhra, I think the only place I went to was Hyderabad, which I have to say, like I grew up there when I was young as well, but in terms of lettering, huge disappointment. Too many like digital signs, very few handmade signs survive in that city now. But yeah, that is me. Thank you.